Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. My world is measured in the space between heartbeats. It is a kingdom of 60 seconds, the golden minute where life and death conduct their brutal final negotiation. I am a paramedic, though that word feels too sterile for what I do. I am a ferryman on a river of chaos, my vessel an ambulance that smells of antiseptic and desperation. My job is to stand on the shore of mortality and deny the river its passengers. I live in a state of perpetual, controlled violence. The violence of a chest compression that cracks a rib to restart a heart. The violence of a needle piercing a vein to deliver a life-saving drug. The violence of a choice made in an instant under the screaming pressure of the clock that decides which of two equally broken bodies gets the full, desperate measure of my attention. My name is Finn, and for 10 years I had learned to build a wall between the man in the ambulance and the man at home. The man in the ambulance was a machine. He was a collection of protocols, a flowchart of life-saving algorithms. He did not feel. He assessed, he triaged, he acted. He had to be a machine because the alternative, to feel the full, crushing weight of every tragedy, was to be ground into dust by the sheer, relentless friction of it all. The man at home, however, was allowed to feel. My home was my sanctuary, the one place the ghosts of the ambulance couldn't follow me. And the keeper of that sanctuary, the woman who exorcised those ghosts with her laughter and her warmth, was my wife, Genevieve. She was a landscape architect, a woman who created beauty and order out of dirt and chaos. It was a fitting profession. She had done the same for my life. She was the calm, green, growing space in the concrete and asphalt landscape of my reality. Our love was the one protocol I never had to question, the one diagnosis that was always certain. It was the place where I could take off the armor, where I could be just Finn, a man who was often tired, sometimes sad, but always unconditionally loved. The sacrifices of my job were significant. Missed dinners, canceled plans, nights spent holding the hands of dying strangers instead of hers. But she understood. She was the bedrock on which my chaotic world was built, the unwavering constant in an equation of infinite, horrifying variables. I loved her with a totality that bordered on the religious. She was my faith, the one thing I held to be true in a world that had shown me time and time again that truth was a fragile, fleeting thing. The call came on a Sunday afternoon in late autumn. The sky was the color of a fresh bruise, and a cold, persistent rain was slicking the roads. It was the end of a brutal 48-hour shift. I was bone-weary, running on caffeine and the fumes of sheer willpower. The dispatcher's voice was clipped, professional, devoid of the emotion the words themselves carried. MVA, head-on collision, 2 vehicles. Route 9 past the old quarry. Multiple critical injuries reported. Serious entrapment. My partner, a good-hearted, seen-it-all veteran named Marcus, just grunted and hit the siren. The ambulance lurched into the rain-swept streets. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the machine take over. I ran through the protocols in my head. C-spine stabilization, assessing for massive hemorrhage, the Glasgow coma scale. I became the paramedic. The tired husband who was just 2 hours away from his wife's embrace ceased to exist. The scene, when we arrived, was a Bosch painting of twisted metal and shattered glass. A sleek silver sedan and a dark blue SUV were locked in a grotesque final embrace, their front ends compressed into a single unrecognizable mass of wreckage. Steam hissed into the cold, damp air. The smell of gasoline and hot burnt oil was thick and cloying. We were the first on scene. Fire and rescue were still 5 minutes out. That meant we were it. We were the entire cavalry. Marcus took the SUV. I took the sedan. It was standard procedure. We split up to assess, to triage, to impose order on the chaos. I moved towards the sedan, my boots crunching on the carpet of broken glass. The driver's side was caved in, the door bent into a cruel concave shape. I shone my mag light through the shattered window, and in that stark white beam, the machine inside me stuttered, faltered, and then shattered into a million pieces. The driver was a woman, slumped over the deployed airbag, a crimson mask of blood obscuring her features. But I didn't need to see her face. I saw the small silver locket around her neck, the one I had given her for our 5th anniversary. I saw the cascade of dark rain-slicked hair. It was Genevieve. For a horrifying, eternal second, I was not a paramedic. I was a husband, and a scream of pure animal denial was clawing its way up my throat. But the machine, the cold, hard-wired training of a decade, fought back. It slammed the door on the scream. It forced my hands to be steady. I wrenched the passenger door open, which had sprung ajar on impact, and slid inside. Her pulse was thready, weak, a frantic butterfly under my fingertips. Her breathing was shallow, a ragged, gurgling sound that spoke of a chest injury. A quick visual assessment told me she had a severe head laceration, likely a significant concussion, or worse, and a deformed left femur, a clear sign of a major fracture, which almost certainly meant a severed femoral artery. She was bleeding out, internally and externally. She had minutes. The world narrowed to the confines of that wrecked car. There was only Genevieve, the sound of her breathing, the ticking of a clock that only I could hear. And then another sound penetrated my bubble of hyperfocus, a groan, a weak, desperate sound from the other vehicle. I had forgotten there was another victim.
A part of my brain, the triage algorithm, clicked back online. 2 patients, both critical. I had to assess the second. I had to make a decision. I backed out of the car, my movements stiff, robotic. "Marcus," I yelled, my voice sounding strange and distant. "Status." "Male, unconscious, severe head trauma, unstable airway," he yelled back. "He's pinned bad. I need the jaws of life, now." I moved towards the SUV. I looked inside. The driver was a man in his late 30s, his face a mess of blood and contusions. He was wearing a gray cashmere sweater, a sweater I recognized. And then I saw his face, the part that wasn't covered in blood. It was Julian. Julian Thorne, a man I knew, a man who had been our friend. He and his wife had been part of our social circle for years. What was he doing out here, in a head-on collision with my wife? The question was a spark of confusion in the raging fire of the moment. And then I saw the answer. On the passenger seat of Genevieve's car, where her purse had been thrown, her phone had fallen out. The screen was cracked, but it was still lit up, and on it was the end of a text message conversation. The last message, sent just moments before the crash, was from her. It read, "Almost there. I can't wait to start our life together. I've left him, Julian. I'm all yours." The world did not stop. The rain did not cease. The hissing of the engine did not quiet. But in my mind, a profound, absolute silence fell. The kind of silence that precedes a supernova. The kind of silence that follows a verdict. He wasn't just a friend. He was the reason. The reason for the late nights she had claimed were work. The reason for the sudden, secretive phone calls. The reason for the emotional distance that had been growing between us for the past year. A distance I had attributed to my own long hours, my own emotional exhaustion. I had been a fool, a blind, trusting, sentimental fool. She hadn't been meeting him. She had been leaving me. This wasn't just a car crash. This was the wreckage of an elopement. This was the scene of her final, ultimate betrayal, frozen in a tableau of steel and blood. Marcus's voice cut through the silence in my head. "Finn, talk to me. Who do we prioritize? They're both circling the drain." Triage. The cold calculus of survival. 1 paramedic, 2 critical patients. Not enough time, not enough hands. I had to choose. My training gave me the parameters. Assess the likelihood of survival. Allocate resources to the one with the better chance. The machine in my head started to run the numbers. Genevieve, severe arterial bleeding, head trauma. Julian, severe head trauma, compromised airway. From a purely clinical standpoint, their chances were terrifyingly, horribly equal. Both were on the knife's edge. Both required immediate, aggressive intervention to survive the next 5 minutes until the fire department arrived with their tools and their extra hands. I could save one. The other would almost certainly die. The choice was a coin toss, a 50-50 proposition, a medical guess. But it was not a medical guess I was making. I looked at Genevieve, my wife, the woman who had just shattered my life. Then I looked at Julian, the man who had been the agent of that shattering, the man she was running to, the man she loved. And in that moment, the machine and the man merged into something new, something cold and clear and utterly decisive. I was no longer a paramedic making a triage decision. I was a judge, a jury, and an executioner, all in one, and I had 60 seconds to deliver my sentence. My love for her, the great foundational truth of my life, was now a gaping, bleeding wound. But her love for him, that was the weapon that had inflicted the wound. Her death would be a tragedy, a release. It would make her a martyr to our broken love. His death, however, his death would be a lesson. It would be a scar she would have to look at every single day for the rest of her life. It would be a ghost that would sit between us at every meal, lie between us in our bed. His death was a life sentence for her, and I was the one who was going to commute it. I turned to Marcus. My voice was calm, steady, the voice of a professional in absolute control. "The female," I said, the word female, a clinical, sterile blade that cut her loose from my heart. "Her femoral artery is compromised. She's got a minute, maybe 2. The male's airway is a problem, but his bleeding is slower. We stabilize her first. That's the call." Marcus nodded, his face unquestioning. I was the senior paramedic. It was my call. He trusted my assessment. He had no reason not to. I went back to Genevieve's car. I did not see my wife. I saw a patient. I saw a project. I ripped a piece of fabric from the car's upholstery and began to fashion a makeshift tourniquet for her leg, applying pressure with a brutal, life-saving efficiency. My hands were steady. My focus was absolute. I was a machine again, performing the protocols that would save her life. And as I worked, as I fought to keep the blood inside her, to keep her heart beating, I did not look at the other car. I did not listen to the ragged, weakening sound of Julian's breathing. I did not allow myself to think of the man whose life was draining away, second by second, just a few feet from me. I had made my choice. I had triaged their souls. And as the first wail of the approaching fire truck siren cut through the rain, I knew, with a chilling, absolute certainty, that I had saved my wife's life. And in doing so, I had just sentenced her to a hell far worse than anything I could have ever imagined. The hospital was a blur of sterile white and fluorescent blue, a world I knew intimately but had never experienced from this side of the gurney. The professional detachment that had been my armor at the scene was now a costume I was forced to wear for a new audience. The doctors, the nurses, the police officers. I was no longer the paramedic in charge. I was the heroic husband, the sole traumatized witness. I gave my statement to a grim-faced state trooper, my voice a carefully constructed monotone of shock and grief. I recounted the accident, the crash, my desperate, futile attempts to save both victims. I described the other driver, Julian, as a tragic stranger, a man in the wrong place at the same time. I omitted the phone. I omitted the text message. I omitted the truth. I was the architect of the new reality now, and the first foundation stone was a lie of omission, laid in the cold, impersonal environment of an emergency room waiting area. Genevieve had been rushed into surgery. Her injuries were severe: the ruptured femoral artery, a compound fracture, a significant subdural hematoma. She was alive, but only just. The surgeon, a woman with tired, compassionate eyes, spoke to me in the clipped, professional shorthand I understood so well. "She's very lucky, Mr. Albright," she said. "The quick thinking with that tourniquet, you saved her life. Another few minutes and she would have bled out." I nodded, my face a mask of humble gratitude. Inside, the cold, hard thing that had been born at the crash scene just solidified further. I hadn't saved her life out of love. I had saved it as a strategic objective.
Her life was the raw material for my new project, and the project was her punishment. Julian was pronounced dead on arrival. His wife, a woman named Clara, whom we had to dinner at our house a dozen times, arrived at the hospital an hour later, her face a shattered mask of disbelief. I had to face her. I had to play the part of the fellow grieving spouse, the man who had been there, who had tried to save her husband. I recounted my rehearsed, sanitized version of the events. I watched her collapse into sobs, and I felt nothing. The part of me that was capable of empathy, of shared human sorrow, had been cauterized on that rainy stretch of road. All I felt was a cold, clinical curiosity as I watched her perform the grief that should have been my wife's. For 3 days, Genevieve was in a medically induced coma to allow the swelling in her brain to subside. I sat by her bedside in the ICU, a silent, motionless sentinel. The nurses saw a devoted husband keeping vigil. Her parents, who had flown in from out of state, saw their strong, stoic son-in-law holding his world together in the face of tragedy. They saw the hero. They had no idea they were looking at the jailer. In the long, silent hours of that vigil, surrounded by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the hiss of the ventilator, I designed the prison I was building for her. The prison would not have bars or locks. It would be built of far stronger materials: silence, guilt, and the unbearable weight of an unspoken truth. My revenge would not be a single cathartic act of violence or confrontation. It would be a slow, methodical, psychological deconstruction. Her death would have been an ending. Her life, this new life I had given her, would be a sentence without parole. I would be her constant, living reminder of what she had done and what she had lost. The ghost of Julian would not haunt her from the afterlife. He would haunt her from my eyes. The key to the entire structure was my silence. I would never accuse her. I would never mention the texts. I would never speak of Julian in any context other than that of a tragic acquaintance who died in an accident. I would give her no enemy to fight, no accusation to deny, no argument to win. She would have to fight only against the truth that she knew and that she knew I knew. Her guilt would be her cell, her conscience would be her guard, and I would be the warden who silently watched her pace the floor of her own self-inflicted damnation. I prepared myself meticulously for the moment she would wake up. I anticipated her questions, her possible states of mind. Her memory of the crash would likely be fragmented, a chaotic collage of sound and sensation. Her first coherent thoughts would be for him. I had to be ready. She woke up on the 4th day. Her parents and I were in the room. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then slowly they found me. Her first word was a dry, rasping whisper: "Finn." I took her hand. It was cold. "I'm here, Jen," I said, my voice soft. "You're safe." I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes, the mental reboot as she tried to place herself. And then the memory, the purpose of her journey came rushing back. Her next question was the one I had been waiting for. Her voice was stronger now, laced with a raw, desperate urgency. "The other car, the other driver, Julian, is he?" She looked at me, her eyes pleading. She was not asking for information, she was asking for a miracle. I held her gaze. I let a moment of carefully crafted, sorrowful silence hang in the air. I let my expression be one of profound shared grief.
And then I delivered the first brick that would build the wall of her new reality. "The paramedics did everything they could, Jen," I said, my voice thick with a perfect imitation of regret. "I'm so sorry. He didn't make it." The sound she made was not a cry of grief. It was a thin, high, animalistic sound of pure, undiluted loss. It was the sound of a soul being torn in two. Her parents rushed to comfort her, thinking her cries were for the horror of the accident, for the death of a man she barely knew. They saw a woman overwhelmed by trauma. I saw a woman grieving for her lost future, for the life she had been just minutes away from starting. And I felt a cold, satisfying click in the core of my being, the sound of a complex mechanism locking perfectly into place. The first phase of my plan was complete. The days that followed were a masterclass in my new craft. I was the perfect, grieving, supportive husband. I handled the arrangements. I spoke with Julian's widow, Clara, offering my condolences, my voice a symphony of sorrow. I helped Genevieve's parents manage the logistics of her care. I was a pillar of strength, a rock of stability in the chaotic aftermath. And all the while, I was watching her. I watched her grief, a grief she had to hide from everyone, a grief that had no legitimate outlet. She couldn't mourn him openly. To the world, he was a casual friend. To her, he was everything. And the only person in the world who knew the truth of her loss was me, the man who had orchestrated it. Her grief became her first secret, the first invisible bar of her cage. The police investigation was a formality. I was the only conscious witness. My statement was the official record. It was a tragic, unavoidable accident, a slick road, a moment of inattention. The case was closed. The narrative I had written became the official, undisputed truth. A week later, Julian's funeral was held. Genevieve was still too weak to leave the hospital, a fact for which I was profoundly grateful. I went alone. I stood in the back of the church, a somber, respectful figure. I listened to the eulogies that painted him as a loving husband, a successful businessman, a pillar of the community. I watched Clara, veiled and broken, weep for the man she thought she knew. And I felt nothing but the cold, satisfying hum of a perfectly executed plan. I was not there to mourn. I was there to gather intelligence. I was there to observe the world she had lost, to understand the texture and shape of the ghost I was going to use to haunt her. After the service, Clara saw me and came over. She hugged me, her body trembling with sobs. "Thank you, Finn," she whispered, "and thank you for trying to save him. It means so much to know he wasn't alone." "Of course, Clara," I said, my voice soft, comforting lie. I only wish I could have done more." As she walked away, I knew my mission was complete. The lie was now cemented in the public record, in the minds of our friends, in the heart of his grieving widow. The stage was set. The prison was built. All that was left was for me to bring the prisoner home. Bringing Genevieve home from the hospital was like transporting a fragile, priceless, and deeply dangerous artifact. The house, our home, the place that had been my sanctuary, was now repurposed. It was no longer a home. It was a carefully controlled environment, a habitat I had designed for the singular purpose of her psychological torment. Every object within its walls, every photograph, every piece of furniture was now a carefully calibrated instrument in the symphony of her silent punishment. Her physical recovery was a long, arduous process. The fractured femur had required surgery, pins, and months of grueling physical therapy. She was dependent on me for everything. I was her nurse, her cook, her chauffeur, her entire support system. And I performed my duties with a flawless, terrifying perfection. I was patient, I was gentle,
I was unfailingly kind. But the warmth, the love that had once been the engine of my care for her was gone. My kindness was a clinical, sterile thing, the detached compassion of a scientist for his test subject. It was a kindness that was, in its own way, more cruel than any anger. I would help her with her painful exercises, my hands steady and professional as I manipulated her healing leg, and I would see the confusion in her eyes.
She was expecting an emotional reckoning, a storm of anger and accusations that would, in its own violent way, cleanse the air. She was waiting for the fight that would allow her to defend herself, to justify herself, to perform the role of the penitent wife. I denied her that release. My kindness was a wall of glass, a barrier she could see through but never break. She was trapped in a state of emotional limbo, and the silence in the house grew louder every day. The ghost of Julian was a constant third presence in our home. I made sure of it. But my methods were subtle, deniable, the work of a master gaslighter. A few weeks after she came home, I found an old photo album while cleaning out a closet. I brought it to her as she rested on the sofa. "Look what I found," I said, my voice full of a gentle nostalgia. "Remember this?" I opened it to a specific page. A photograph from a summer barbecue 2 years earlier. The 4 of us. Me and Genevieve, Julian and Clara, all smiling, arms around each other. The perfect image of 4 happy friends. "That was a good day," I said softly, a wistful smile on my face. "Julian was so funny that day. Remember the story he told about the fishing trip?" I watched her face as she looked at the photograph. I saw the wave of nausea, the sharp intake of breath, the desperate attempt to maintain her composure. She was looking at a picture of the man she had loved, the man whose death was her fault, and she was being forced to reminisce about him with the man she had betrayed. I don't really remember," she stammered, her eyes darting away from the image. "You're probably just tired," I said, my voice full of concern. "The trauma can affect your memory. It's okay. We have the pictures to help us remember." I left the album on the coffee table, open to that page. It stayed there for a week. Every time she looked up, she saw his smiling, oblivious face, a ghost from a past that was now a minefield. Her torment was my new science. I studied her reactions, her triggers, her breaking points. I learned to play her like a finely tuned instrument of sorrow. One evening, the local news ran a story about a new traffic light being installed at the intersection on Route 9, the site of the crash, a measure to prevent future accidents. I made sure the television was on. I watched her as the news anchor described the tragic accident last autumn that claimed the life of local businessman Julian Thorne. I saw the way her hand flew to her mouth, the way her body went rigid. I turned to her, my face a mask of somber reflection. "It's good they're finally doing something," I said quietly. "It's a dangerous stretch of road. It should have been done sooner. Maybe he'd still be with us." I let the sentence hang in the air, a perfectly crafted piece of psychological shrapnel. I was not accusing her. I was agreeing with an unspoken truth. It was her fault. And I was her co-mourner, the only other person in the room who understood the tragedy. She was trapped in an echo chamber of my own design, her own guilt reflected back at her in 1,000 subtle, unbearable ways. She began to deteriorate. Not physically. Her body was healing with a stubborn biological resolve. But her mind, her soul, was coming apart at the seams. She stopped sleeping. She would wander the house at night, a pale, silent ghost in her own home. She lost weight. The vibrant, confident woman I had married was being replaced by a haunted, hollow-eyed stranger. She tried, on several occasions, to break my silence. She would try to provoke me, to start a fight. She would bring up the accident, her voice trembling, trying to get me to talk about it, to feel something, anything. "Don't you ever think about it, Finn?" she asked one night, her voice raw. "About how it could have been you? About how close we came to losing everything?" I looked at her, my expression one of deep, sorrowful love. I try not to, I said softly. I try to just be grateful. I didn't lose you, Jen. You're here. You're safe. That's all that matters to me. Every word of love was a lie. Every expression of gratitude was a turn of the screw. I was force-feeding her a diet of my supposed forgiveness, a forgiveness that was more suffocating than any condemnation. The breaking point, the moment I knew the structure was about to fail, came on the 1-year anniversary of the crash. I knew the day would be a crucible for her. I did nothing special. I made breakfast. I went to work. I acted as if it were just another Tuesday. When I came home, I found her in the living room, a bottle of whiskey on the table, a wild, desperate look in her eyes. She had been waiting for me. "We need to talk," she said, her voice a low, dangerous slur. This was it, the moment of confession, the moment of release she had been craving for a year, the moment I was going to deny her. "Of course, darling," I said, sitting down opposite her, my face a study in calm concern. "What's wrong?" "Don't you know what day it is?" she cried, her voice cracking. "It's been a year since the accident." "I know," I said gently. "I didn't want to bring it up. I didn't want to upset you." "Upset me?" she laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "Finn, I have been living in hell for a year. A quiet, polite, well-cared-for hell. And you've been the perfect angel, haven't you? The perfect, forgiving husband. But I see you. I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. You know, don't you?" She was leaning forward now, her eyes blazing, searching my face for the confirmation she so desperately needed. She wanted me to be the monster so she could finally be the victim. I held her gaze. I let my own eyes fill with a perfect, believable confusion and hurt. "Know what, Jen?" I asked, my voice a whisper of pure, wounded innocence. "Know that you're in pain? Know that you're still traumatized? Of course I know that, and I'm here for you. I will always be here for you. Whatever you're imagining, whatever ghosts you're fighting, you don't have to fight them alone." I was gaslighting her on an epic scale. I was taking her one true, terrible secret, and I was framing it as a symptom of her own mental instability. I was telling her that the monster she saw wasn't real, that it was just a shadow cast by her own broken mind. I saw the fight go out of her. The last desperate spark of defiance in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by a vast, terrifying emptiness. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, and I could see the final horrifying thought forming in her mind. What if he was right? What if she was just mad? What if the guilt had finally broken her, and the cold, judging eyes of her husband were just a figment of her own shattered imagination? She began to deteriorate. Not physically. Her body was healing with a stubborn biological resolve. But her mind, her soul, was coming apart at the seams. She stopped sleeping. She would wander the house at night, a pale, silent ghost in her own home. She lost weight. The vibrant, confident woman I had married was being replaced by a haunted, hollow-eyed stranger. She tried on several occasions to break my silence. She would try to provoke me, to start a fight. She would bring up the accident, her voice trembling, trying to get me to talk about it, to feel something, anything. "Don't you ever think about it, Finn?" she asked one night, her voice raw. "About how it could have been you? About how close we came to losing everything?" I looked at her, my expression one of deep, sorrowful love. "I try not to," I said softly. "I try to just be grateful. I didn't lose you, Jen. You're here, Jen. You're safe. That's all that matters to me." Every word of love was a lie. Every expression of gratitude was a turn of the screw. The breaking point, the moment I knew the structure was about to fail came on the 1-year anniversary of the crash. I knew the day would be a crucible for her. I did nothing special. I made breakfast. I went to work. I acted as if it were just another Tuesday. When I came home, I found her in the living room, a bottle of whiskey on the table, a wild, desperate look in her eyes. She had been waiting for me.
I had not just imprisoned her body and her conscience. I had conquered the final territory. I had conquered her reality itself. She began to weep, but these were not the hot, angry tears of a trapped woman. They were the cold, empty tears of a soul that has finally, truly given up. I went to her. I knelt before her. I took her in my arms, and I held her as she sobbed. I was the comforting husband, holding his broken wife. And as I held her, as I stroked her hair and whispered meaningless words of comfort, I felt the cold, satisfying finality of a project completed. The demolition was a success. The structure was gone. All that was left was this quiet, sterile, and eternal hell of my own perfect design. The year that followed her breakdown was a study in stillness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet, desolate landscape. Genevieve was no longer a prisoner fighting against her cage. She was a specimen, perfectly preserved in the amber of our shared, silent life. She became a ghost in our home, a beautiful, fragile automaton who moved through the days with a listless, vacant grace. She did what I asked. She ate what I cooked. She slept in our bed, a cold and distant satellite in my orbit. The fire that had once defined her, the passion that had driven her into the arms of another man and had animated her betrayal, was gone. All that remained was a profound, unshakable emptiness. She was a body from which the soul had been methodically, surgically removed. And I was the surgeon. I had become a master of my craft. My revenge was not a single violent act, but a sustained, atmospheric pressure. It was in the quiet breakfasts, where the only sound was the clinking of silverware. It was in the long evenings, where we would sit in the same room, reading separate books, the ghost of Julian a palpable, silent presence on the sofa between us. It was in my unwavering, clinical kindness, a kindness that was a constant, unspoken reminder of the debt she could never repay, her own life. My silence was absolute. I had built a fortress of denial around her, and she had finally stopped trying to scale its walls. She had accepted her reality, or rather, the reality I had constructed for her. She was the traumatized survivor, and I was her sainted, long-suffering caregiver. The world saw us as a tragic, beautiful story of devotion. Our friends would praise my patience, my loyalty. "You're a saint, Finn," they would say, "the way you've cared for her after everything she's been through." And I would just smile, a humble, sad smile, and say, "It's what you do for the person you love." Every word of praise was another stone on her chest, another layer of insulation in my perfect, soundproof prison. I was no longer sure if I was acting. The role of the devoted husband had become a second skin. The machine that had taken over at the crash site had never truly relinquished control. I went to work, I saved lives, I came home. I was a functioning, respected member of society. But inside, I was as hollow as she was. I had sacrificed my own capacity for joy, for love, for any real human connection, in order to fuel the cold, slow-burning engine of my vengeance. We were two ghosts haunting the same beautiful, empty house. The end came not with a bang, but with a whisper. It was a Tuesday night, almost 2 years to the day since the accident. We were washing the dishes, a silent, practiced routine. She was rinsing, and I was drying. She had not truly looked me in the eye for months. Her gaze was always directed somewhere past my shoulder, at a point in the middle distance where her thoughts seemed to reside. But that night, she stopped. She turned off the water. She turned to me, and for the first time in a very long time, her eyes met mine. And in them, I saw something that was not fear, not guilt, not emptiness.
It was a flicker of the old Genevieve, a spark of the intelligent, analytical woman she had once been. She had found a flaw in my design. "You never talk about him," she said, her voice a dry, scratchy thing from disuse. It took me a moment to understand who she meant. Julian had become a non-person, a name erased from our history. "There's nothing to say," I replied, my voice even, my old defense mechanism kicking in. It was a tragedy. "No," she said, and her voice was stronger now, clearer. "It was more than that. I've been thinking, for 2 years I've been thinking, about that day, about the odds." I felt a cold, familiar prickle of alarm. This was new. This was an unscripted deviation. "The odds," she repeated, her gaze unwavering. "You're a paramedic, Finn. You're a man of numbers, of triage." I was bleeding out, a ruptured femoral artery. He had a head injury and a compromised airway. In the field, with one paramedic, what are the survival statistics for a traumatic arterial bleed versus an obstructed airway? She was talking my language. She was using the cold, hard calculus of my own profession against me. She had spent 2 years in silence, not just suffering, but analyzing, reconstructing. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice a little too tight. "I did what I could." "Did you?" she pressed, taking a small step closer. "An obstructed airway is the most immediate threat to life. It's the A in every ABC protocol you've ever learned. Airway, breathing, circulation. You stabilize the airway first, always."
That's the rule. But you didn't. You left him. You spent your time, those critical seconds, on my leg, on the circulation. You broke the most fundamental rule of your profession. She had me. With a horrifying, brilliant clarity, she had found the single, fatal flaw in my perfect story, the medical inconsistency, the choice that a machine, a true paramedic, would never have made. My choice had not been a clinical one. It had been a personal one. And she had finally, after 2 years of silent, agonizing analysis, seen it. "You chose me," she whispered, and her voice was not full of gratitude. It was full of a dawning, terrible understanding. "No," I said, the lie feeling thin and brittle in my mouth. "I chose the patient with the better chance." She laughed. It was a dry, broken sound, but it was a real laugh, the first I had heard in years. "No, you didn't," she said, a small, sad, triumphant smile on her face. "You chose the one whose survival would be the better punishment." And there it was, the truth, spoken aloud in the quiet, sterile space of our kitchen. The wall of silence I had so carefully constructed had been breached, not by my confession, but by her deduction. The game was over. My project was complete. I had wanted to force her to live with her guilt, and I had succeeded. I had succeeded so completely that her guilt had sharpened her mind into a scalpel that had finally cut through to the cold, hard heart of my own. I did not deny it. I did not confirm it. I simply looked at her, and in my eyes, for the first time, I let her see the truth. I let her see the cold, calculating machine that had been looking back at her for 2 years. I let her see the man who had triaged her soul on the side of a highway. Her smile faded. The brief moment of intellectual triumph was replaced by the final, crushing weight of her sentence. Knowing the truth was so much worse than just suspecting it. Her prison was no longer a cage of unspoken guilt. It was now a cage of proven, deliberate, and exquisitely cruel justice. She would live every remaining day of her life with the certain knowledge that her husband had not saved her out of love, but had condemned her out of hate, and that I would be there every day to watch her serve her sentence. I turned back to the sink and picked up a towel. I took the wet plate from her unresisting hand, and I began to dry it. The silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer the silence of the unspoken. It was the silence of the judged, the silence of a verdict that has been rendered and from which there is no appeal. It was the silence of a life sentence, a sentence we would both serve together until the very end. Thanks for being here on Reddit Whispers. I've shared my story, but now I want to hear yours. What's the most surprising decision that turned everything around for you? Your comment could be the lifeline someone else is looking for today.